In your experience, what have been some of the most effective strategies and de-escalation techniques that you've seen implemented to mitigate youth violence in the school setting? Carrie, could you get us started here?
Yeah. First of all, let's get real. If we're waiting for a crisis to happen before we take action, we're already 3 to 5 years behind schedule. The secret sauce isn't in reacting to violence, it's in preventing it from sprouting in the first place. Think of it like planting trees. If you want shade, the best time to plant that tree was years ago, the second best time right now. And when we keep in mind one really important factor, which is happy people don't attack you. It's almost physically impossible. If you ever see someone cracking up and they're they're not going to attack somebody. They're not saying anything bad. They're not thinking anything bad. They're not acting on anything to hurt you. Not when they're laughing and happy. If somebody attacks you for one reason, it's because they're not happy with themselves. And so when we look at the most effective strategies I've seen revolve around building a culture of trust and empathy. When students feel seen, heard, valued, understood. I always say that all of us have one addiction. Everybody in this planet has an addiction. It's the same addiction, and that is to be understood. And so we need to be able to train teachers and staff and even students themselves in de-escalation techniques that are easy to remember and use under stress. Simple steps like maintaining a calm tone of voice, using non-threatening body language, deep listening, not just active listening where you're playing the game of going, oh, but actually listening to understand, listening for the other person's emotions. Being able to learn these conflict resolution techniques, it's got a component of the anti-bullying already built into that, because most of the anti-bullying training out there right now involves things that don't work, like, oh, tell a teacher, tell a parent. Kids don't do that. So whatever we're training, whatever we're teaching, especially kids, it has to be realistic for what happens, not just what sounds good on paper.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think the de-escalation is critical. I believe that in today's world, in schools, de-escalation training is as important as any fire drill or active shooter drill, because as mentioned, if we've got a great culture, there's a whole different approach that's occurring, generally speaking. In addition to de-escalation, I'm a big proponent of something that I call pre-escalation. How are we acting to each other in that culture day to day? How are we really telling people what we think about them? So how we're acting before the crisis happens. Are we approachable? And I say, oh, us, because I'm talking about administration, students, everybody's this culture gets established. What do we really like if we're really honest with ourselves? Or do we make it so we really don't come across like we care, but we say we do? And that's the pre-escalation. If we're not establishing trust in our day-to-day interactions, then when that crisis occurs, that person who's in that crisis mode, they know we don't really care. Maybe they don't. I don't know. I'm making that as a point. The other thing that I'm a really big proponent on is, if we do the de-escalation, the pre-escalation training, that's the prevent. I'm a big proponent of threat assessment as a mitigation factor. Threat assessment allows us to see the bigger picture. It allows, people should be trained in this, to see the bigger picture, to see what's occurring as not only with particular issues, to ask the why, not just see what happened, but the why. Why is this occurring? What are the other issues? And to see trends and patterns that are emerging within that environment, not just the individual, and maybe address those and not only help out that individual who's in stress at the time, but maybe others that might be affected as well.
I think you're both spot on. I think one of the other pieces is the early identification of students, particularly in K through 12, but even in college and university settings that are struggling. And I think we miss things sometimes. So, for example, a student who's sitting at a table with their classmates or their peers, but they're all the way at one end of the table and the other kids are at the other end of the table. And so on first blush, first appearance, it's like, oh, everybody's sitting together. But the reality is this person at the end of the table is all by themselves. And either they've been pushed to isolation or they've decided because of bullying or not being accepted or some of their maybe a behavioral attribute of their own, they've self-isolated. So they're part of the crowd, but they're really not. And I think being observant in classroom settings, in recreational settings, in cafeteria settings, who's that kid who just is there but isn't really fitting in, that's alone, and reaching out to them. There have been a number of interviews of individuals that have perpetrated acts of mass violence, particularly in school settings. And they've been asked, why did you do this? What could have maybe changed the trajectory of your life? And it's not unusual for them to say, if somebody had noticed me, if somebody had simply said to me, hi, good morning, how are you? Or notice the fact that maybe I hadn't eaten, or my clothes were disheveled, or whatever the case may be, and had reached out to me and saw me. And I think one of the previous gentlemen said this, saw me as a person and engage with me as a person. That could have very much interrupted or changed the trajectory of a student. And then certainly behavioral health, behavioral threat assessment teams do provide that opportunity to look beyond the behavior that's presenting to try to figure out what's happening, what's the dynamic in that individual and in their ecosystems that may be driving the behavior that's become challenging and now is recognized in a formal process.
If I can kind of briefly piggyback on what Frank just said, the teacher who stands at the classroom door and greets the students coming in the door. We did a 6-part training with the school district up in Northern California, 6 90-minute trainings. We had to break it up because teachers don't have a lot of release time. It's one of the biggest roadblocks to effectively training school teachers is how much time they have for that professional development. And after the second, or at the beginning of the second block, we were going over what were the big takeaways from the first block. And this teacher stood up. He's the sole social studies teacher for his elementary school. So every student comes through his classroom. And he said, oh, I realize now that I can't just say when the students walk in the door, sit down, shut up, and open up your books. And the other teachers started laughing, and I was laughing. I thought he was joking. And he looked at me and he goes, Carrie, I'm serious. That's how I've been operating for the last 20 years. And I realize now that I need to shift that behavior. You couldn't knock me over with a feather, because holy wow, what an impact we can have in a short amount of time by bringing this awareness to teachers and other school staff. And it can't be just the teachers. It has to be every employee in the school district, the bus driver, so they don't trigger a kid before they drop them off. And then the teacher's like, what the heck just walked into my classroom? Or the playground monitor, where they go off to lunch or off to recess, and all of a sudden the kid's walking back into the classroom triggered. And the teacher's like, wait a second, you're supposed to be out there having fun. So every member who has interaction with the child, including janitorial staff.
Thanks for that point, Carrie. I think that's so important. I know in my school, who knows the most on the staff about kind of has their finger on the pulse? The custodial staff, because they're around everywhere, right? And I think the idea when we talked about preventing violence of bringing a bigger team together to be part of that is so important. Brooke, Kuban, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What are some of the strategies, de-escalation techniques that you've come top of mind for you?
Absolutely. So as I feel like as a teacher, listening to these 3 people talk, I'm sitting here shaking my head with a lot of it, because I resonate with a lot of it. I see a lot of it, or I don't see a lot of it, and I know that I should see more of it. So it's been very interesting to hear. Personally, from my perspective, for the last 2 years, my administration has let me, as the SAVE sponsor for our school, send out a school safety survey and to the whole entire student body. And this is a part of our initiative to advocate for a safer campus. It asks about things such as school. I'm so sorry. I'm at school right now. It asks about things such as school cleanliness, school safety, bullying, and relationships. And this has really given me and the administration great insight into the culture of safety at our school. We were able to use these results to have an open discussion with our principal about changes that need to be made and what needed to be addressed. And some of the biggest things that we've seen from these results is a small trend of students that see bullying, but a large trend of those students that don't report the bullying. And a lot of these happen to also be freshmen, but still there were a good number of all of the grades that didn't report anything. We also saw from those freshmen that they didn't even know who to turn to if they were to report something. So we've also been pushing a lot for acknowledging our trusted adults on campus. Last year, we celebrated them by having a big donut social one morning for them.
Excuse me.
I'm so sorry. And again, this year, we're going to put some stickers that we made on their doors that say, "I'm a trusted adult," which kind of gives any student that might be feeling lost maybe a little bit more guidance towards knowing who they could talk to. And I think that having that trusted adult on campus or knowing who their trusted teachers are will really help kind of guide those who might be feeling more lost, might give them kind of the beacon of light that they need to see to say, okay, I can maybe talk to this person. Because you say talk to the counselors and they're sometimes big and scary, or they're busy, or they're a little intimidating, whereas your English teacher or your math teacher or your music teacher might be a little bit more approachable. So those are, that's one initiative that we've been really pushing at my school.
Yeah, and I think we all collectively agree that community and education are one of the most important things for de-escalation. So in my experience, I know a bunch of you guys have mentioned that having teachers get involved and really having that one-on-one interaction with students is important. But I think students as well have a part in this. So personally for me, I have seen peer-to-peer education be really important within my project, but also within my community as a whole. I have seen with the peer-to-peer education, you're able to build that community and that safe space for students to not only learn, but also have that personal experience and to really educate themselves at a deeper level. You know, oftentimes the way that I grew up in elementary school, we would often learn about bullying in an assembly, and that would take place in our gym, and it would have a few teachers up on stage teaching about the consequences of bullying. But really, a lot of the time we were goofing off or distracted or not really paying attention because, you know, these are people of authority, and, you know, you could easily just lose interest. So I have seen that peer-to-peer education not only builds that community, but also educates students in just a totally different way. And I think as students, that is our job, to really help foster that community so that, you know, we could rely on one another and, you know, bridge that gap of, you know, those students that do feel alone and have that inclusivity for everyone.
I just want to wrap that up by saying it's not about stopping violence. It is, but it's not. It's about fostering connections that prevent it from occurring in the first place. You said it incredibly well.
Research, time and time again, has pointed to the need for a positive school climate as foundational to building a safe environment. What best practices have you seen in your experience, in your work, in your schools that have helped promote that positive school climate? How can students be involved in identifying these solutions? What are the protective factors that are critical to have in place for that positive school climate to flourish?
So yeah, I think it's incredibly helpful to have students be involved in these solutions. After all, again, you have that relatability factor when it is student to student, peer to peer. So in my school personally, I have seen mentorship programs work wonderfully, right? So especially at a high school level, if we go into the specifics, freshmen are coming in and they really do not have any experience with high school, and it's a huge transition, not only academically, but also when making friends. And I think it's so important to have someone to help guide you a bit, someone to rely on, and someone that you could lean on for assistance. So with mentoring that I have seen in my school, typically I was a part of the program and I would help incoming freshmen navigate the whole high school experience and really help them whenever I could and whatever they needed help with. And not even just helping them on that level, but also just being there for them, being a friend to them, and helping them acclimate to the new environment that they are adjusting to. And once again, it is a hard transition, and not even just freshmen, right? You could be a sophomore, junior, senior, or even elementary level and struggle to make friends, to succeed academically or join certain organizations, clubs, and having a mentor to help guide you through those experiences, but also just be a friend for you, I have found incredibly helpful. And it's one of the one things that I have loved about our school, and the really super helpful factor for students coming in and just adjusting to whatever transition they may be experiencing.
As a teacher, a high school teacher, I can tell you that we are very much pushing positive environment, because we do find that the more positive the environment, the more that students learn. Our school uses something called positive behavioral interventions and support, or PBIS for short. And we use this to celebrate those students who do show good leadership, that have good grades, positive behavior, and just generally being an upstander within our school. And they receive positive reinforcement through being invited to special events on campus, being rewarded with candy or treats at lunch, or just being recognized as student leaders on each month by the principal. We find that recognizing those students that go above and beyond to be the best of the best on campus helps to spur the fire under those that are maybe not as achieved, or maybe want to do better. If they see these students that are getting all these rewards, all this positive reinforcement, and it creates a chain reaction, which we hope will therefore spread to all the other students to be the best versions of themselves. We've also adopted as a parish this program called the 7 Habits of Leaders, and we call it Leader in Me. And it basically, it's a program that we try to teach that will help the students take on leadership roles within themselves by implementing all of these different habits throughout their daily lives. And the school has chosen several students from several backgrounds and social groups. So we might have the best of the best, or the student that might be, not have the best grades, but is still a good kid. And we put them together and they start to talk and be trained and learn about being a leader on campus. And they are starting to make the positive changes within our school. And it's really great because we get feedback directly from all different students of all different backgrounds. And therefore, it's not just a cookie cutter approach from the good kids. It's more of an approach from everybody, which is really fostering a positive environment within our campus. And it's really had great success for us. So I think really fostering a community of kids that want to change, making them want to feel like they are the changers by making them leaders, is super important to creating a positive campus.
I agree, and I want to also talk about law enforcement in the schools, what their impact on the climate might be. As we're creating a positive climate, law enforcement was pulled out of a lot of the schools in past years, and trust has been strained, let's face it. But as we're putting them back in the schools, there has to be really a critical discussion about what is that role? What is it going to do to the climate? Because the moment you have somebody walk in to an environment in a uniform, the environment changes. It's not because of the person, it's because of what they represent. That role, that person has the authority to take away somebody's civil liberties with the authority of the government. So my point is, as we have them back in the schools, they're there for more than just to be ready for an active shooter. They have such a much broader role, but it needs to be established and let's be clear on what the expectations are, and not just for the officer, but the administration and even the students to a certain extent. So safety is a feeling, not a fact. Okay. So when you ask somebody, do you feel safe, or what makes you feel safe, you're going to get different responses depending on people's backgrounds, what they're used to or what they were taught. So for example, a uniformed officer make some people feel safe, but it may make others feel unsafe. A weapon may make some people feel safe, others. And all that comes into the factors as we're setting a positive climate. And so understanding what that officer's role is, and the officer clearly understanding it, be careful how it's used. Do not use law enforcement to enforce policy when you can help it. And don't give the impression that's why they're there. For example, if you have a difficult student meeting, and maybe the parents are going to be there, or whatever the situation is, I've seen where law enforcement's asked to be in the room. Well, the moment that student or that parent or whoever it is comes into that room, it looks like a law enforcement action, even though the officer is just doing what they were asked. My suggestion is don't have them in there, because that gives it loses all objectivity, or the impression of objectivity. Even if the officer had no involvement, it automatically looks like it was a law enforcement action. So as we're saying, the culture, how everybody has their role, has to be looked at and constantly critiqued.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk about the behavioral, positive behavioral intervention and support and the role of law enforcement. So my 10-year-old daughter started in a brand new school this year in a brand new state. And the first day of school, every on-duty sheriff's deputy, police officer, firefighter, and EMT was at the school. In addition, all the teachers and staff were at the school. In addition, they had just this tremendously upbeat music playing. And that's how the kids started their school year, with everybody in the community really engaged with them and welcoming them to the school. Now, every day when I drop her off, the school staff and teachers are out there, and they literally walk up to the car door and open it and greet your child and welcome them to school. And that music continues. So right from the beginning of the school year and the beginning of every single day is that staff and teacher engagement. The other piece is a number of years ago, we did a study of crisis intervention training in law enforcement in a particular school district in Virginia. And I remember talking to one of the SROs, and I asked her, what is your job? What do you see your job as a school resource officer? And she said, my job is to be a problem solver, to find those kids that are struggling, that are challenged, or the kids that want to be police officers, and engage with them. But she said, I can't tell you how many problems I head off before they ever get to the principal's office. And I think that's such an important piece of this. And I think, when we look at SROs, sadly in today's day and age, it's all about active shooter and violence interruption and all of this stuff. The folks that are SROs and are really good SROs, they're engaged with those kids every single day. They're the kids' best friends. They're the Pied Piper of the school. They're working with the peer support teams in the schools and trying to build them up and be a resource. And so I share that because I think it ties so much into what the other speakers have talked about in terms of really setting that positive attitude. And I got to see it in real life with a day that we were filled with trepidation, dropping off my daughter at a brand new school, as I said, in a brand new state, and a child who has her own unique challenges from autism. And it's just been an absolutely wonderful experience. And we're about a month into this. So I can't say enough about PBIS and just that engagement piece.
Frank, I'm so glad that you're having that experience. And we're talking about best practices. And the great thing about best practices is what's working in your community, what's working in Louisiana, it'll work anywhere because all of us have a limbic system. All of us have a fear center response. And the music and the greeting and the community all make you feel like you belong. You're not an outsider. You're not unsafe. And we all know kids, when we talk about best practices, we got to be careful though at the same time, because we all know kids are experts at spotting a phony a mile away. If they sense that we're just ticking boxes with best practices, they'll tune out faster than you can say school assembly. The real magic happens when we give students a voice and genuinely listen to them. And I've seen schools achieve fantastic results by involving students in shaping their own environment, from peer mentoring programs that we've talked about, student councils that have a say in school policies, and the ability to have the opportunity to openly discuss, for kids to openly discuss their challenges, their thoughts, their ideas without fear of judgment or punishment. We should encourage student-led initiatives that promote that kindness, that respect, that inclusivity, because these are the roots that strengthen a positive school climate. And remember, when students help create the rules, they're more likely to follow them as well. And with all of that, the flip side is the things that we teach the students and the teachers for de-escalation, as an example. When we talk about best practices, what are we teaching them to actually do? And as one example, I teach something called the pause trifecta, which is something that we created at IDEA. And whatever is being taught needs to be easy to understand, easy to remember, and easy to implement. Because when you're under stress, when you're in the strain of that conflict, when your PFC, your prefrontal cortex, is shut down and you're in an amygdala hijack, you need to be able to implement something that just comes naturally. So as an example, one of the tools, this pause trifecta, is 3 steps. It's based on neuroscience, so we know it works with everybody, and yet it's easy to put into place. It's 3 questions. First question, do you mind if we pause for a moment? Do you like where this is going? Can we work together to figure out a solution to this problem? So whether you're at home with a family or a spouse or a friend at school or a coworker, a supervisor, subordinate, with a citizen out in the community, when you go up to the grocery store for a gallon of milk, the pause trifecta works everywhere. Do you mind if we pause for a moment? Do you like where this is going? Can we work together to figure out a solution? Now, the words might change a little bit, especially on that third question, depending on what the situation is. But if I've opened up my door and accidentally hit the car next to me when I'm getting out in a parking lot of the grocery store, and the person gets out and starts screaming at me, the third question might just be, can we take a look and see if there's any damage, and kind of go from there? Would you help me look at the car door? And now you're working together. But it's things like these that have to be practical. And again, they have to be easy to understand. They have to be easy to remember. They have to be easy to implement. Whatever we do for best practices has to meet those 3 criteria.
Young people are our nation's most precious asset. And when they go to school, they're there to learn, to grow. And we all know that the rash of school shootings in this country reached an unprecedented high in 2023 with 340 different instances. Given this distressing rise in gun violence, how has the approach to school safety concerning youth violence evolved in your experience? And what do school administrators, teachers need to be thinking about or anticipating in the future?
So I think that with the rise of gun violence, also comes the rise of social media and the role that it plays with young people's lives. Social media, it creates a space for students to bully and threaten from behind a screen. Our state, Louisiana, has actually just implemented a brand new law that states that students can't have their phones on them at all during the school day. It can't be in their pockets. It has to be off and put away. A lot of parents have given pushback to this, but in reality, I think that this is a school safety practice that could potentially lower instances of at least cyberbullying at school and reducing the taking and spread of unsolicited photos or videos. It reduces screen time from social media where they might be looking at things that can be conducive to a negative learning environment. It also heavily emphasizes to students that all threats of violence, either to themselves or to others, need to be reported immediately to a trusted adult. So taking away the cell phones also just helps students to focus in more on their studies and can potentially lower violence in schools, because then now they're in the moment, they can talk face to face with each other. They're learning social skills that may therefore otherwise be lost and create these feelings that I need to, respond with violence. We also really heavily emphasize for students that threats of violence, either to themselves or others, need to report it to a trusted adult. There have been several instances in our district of students posting ominous or threatening photos online, and luckily they were taken seriously and reported, whether they were meant to be taken seriously or not. And each of those cases that was reported to our local authorities, therefore potentially stopped any potential violence before it started. Making our administration and students smart about social media and the ever-evolving role that it's playing in our lives, their lives, it's not going away. And it's key to stopping potential violence before it starts, making kids smart about social media, and also maybe even reducing their time so they learn how to be humans with each other. And it helps them handle the emotions that come with being a teenager and learning and growing and socializing with others. So I really think that having some smart conversations about social media and how schools handle social media is going to play a huge role in this.
I think earlier we all, or some of us, talked about the importance of behavioral threat assessment in schools. And I think, again, that early identification of children, students that are at risk, that are their behavior is bringing them to the attention of teachers or school counselors, getting them into a behavioral threat assessment process, and really looking at what interventions are appropriate and what supports can be put in place for the student are incredibly important. I think right now, in some places, there is this feeling that behavioral threat assessment teams are meant to get kids out of school, that they're part of the school disciplinary process. I would argue that they really have to be part of the school therapeutic process and part of the behavioral intervention process, with the goal of really taking care of students and doing it in a way that brings the school resource officer, the teacher, the special education provider, if that's appropriate, the gym teacher, whoever knows the most about this child, into the conversation so that the factors that are driving the behavior can be fleshed out, which then allows for the appropriate interventions to be put in place. I think the other piece of behavioral threat assessment processes that is somewhat lost in the equation is the piece around management. And I think we have to engage persons outside of the school, because the school is the community and the community is the school. And so we need to marshal resources both in the school setting, but also in the community setting that support the student, but also support their families and their caregivers, and who stay with these kids and their families for the long run. 24 sessions of therapy, medication prescription, those are important. Those are pieces of this. But really, that continuity of care and intervention and support for the long haul is just critically important to the whole piece around happy and healthy and successful students, as well as violence interruption.
Looking at the things that have occurred in the past 3 years, there's a lot of things that come to mind. There's the behavioral changes that are occurring within the walls, and what we're asking of our students and our staff. Things such as the cell phones no longer being allowed in schools. Like it was mentioned a few minutes ago. I think I read recently that there's 9 different states that have seen this as a good thing. We're going to see very quickly if this is a good thing or not. But there's also wellness activities that are occurring, and within those areas, there's a whole lot of physical changes that have occurred in the last couple of years. The real push has been towards security vestibules, where you're no longer walking in the front door and seeing a desk. You're actually in a secure area to create additional buffers. Glass reinforcement on doors and any ground floor windows in an effect to stop violence, stop gunshots, or other effects that may be on that glass to buy time. Cameras. We've had cameras a long time, but let me tell you, cameras are changing really quickly with artificial intelligence. And those cameras are becoming a platform, not just in the schools, but anywhere that has them. So we're with facial recognition and gun detection technology, the technology to identify clusters of people and all kinds of other things that might be happening in the safety and security realm in a school. Those have all evolved very quickly in the past couple of years. And security staffing, what does that look like? What's our comfort level? What do we want in these schools? So the discussion is the law enforcement in there. Is it a police officer? Is it security? That's continuing to evolve. And as mentioned earlier, SRO is returning. But another push that's occurring is it no longer becoming an other duties as assigned. Somebody who actually looks at this every day, it becomes their job. I always think about it when we first started getting computers and things in the business world and in the government world. The person who was put in charge of computers was somebody that had one at home. Oh, you know something about it. And in a lot of schools, it's still that way with safety. And what's evolving, I think, is directors of security as a job, whether it's at that school or that district. And I think that evolution is going to continue along with the technology and the wellness programs.
Yeah, so I fully agree with what everyone else has mentioned, and I have seen how safety measures have evolved within my own school and growing up. And again, we have seen safety measures more in the physical sense, where more law enforcement within schools and various other examples. Yeah, I think it is important to mention that there needs to be other safety measures, again, as we have mentioned throughout this whole time, to build that community. And sure, we could have safety measures like law enforcement or bulletproof glass or whatnot, but it's really about making the students feel safe, welcome, and having children not be ostracized from their community so that they commit these crimes. So I think that's the direction that we're moving in now, hopefully, is to really create that safe environment for students to feel welcome, to really want to go to school. I know we mentioned social media, and that's a huge thing within my generation. And even if it's not explicit bullying, there are ways that students could easily ostracize other students, and it could be in the smallest ways, excluding students from a group chat where they have their friends, or commenting under posts and not necessarily explicitly saying something awful, but maybe not the nicest comment. And I think when we move in a direction that focuses more on preventing that and really educating students on the impacts of what that could do to another student, I think that's incredibly helpful. And I have seen it within my own Event to Prevent project where we went to elementary age students and we taught them about cyberbullying. And we did it in a way that was more in a metaphorical sense. We had a game, and in that game, students kind of saw the consequences of bullying without us explicitly saying this is bullying. And there they were able to pick up the pieces, and we asked them questions after that game, and they like pulled it all together. And it was so interesting to see how involved they were and how they really wanted to make a change, and they were able to really understand the harmful impacts of bullying and cyberbullying more specifically. And sometimes I think that it is undermined how students want to make a difference. And sometimes they just simply forget, it's more of a conscious effort for students, and it could easily slip their mind if they're already living a fulfilling life, they already have friends, sometimes they just get lost in whatever they're already doing. So educating those students, really helping them understand that how imperative it is to include other students, to prevent that bullying, to make students feel more welcome and their peers feel more welcome. I think that's so important, and hopefully that's the direction we're moving in now, rather than just having more physical safety measures, if that makes sense.
The physical safety measures are an easy place to stop. Well, we'll prevent school shootings because we have these physical safety measures in place. It has to go beyond that because, these numbers that we talk about, when you first pose the question, it's a stark reminder we can't keep doing the same things and expect different results. The old Albert Einstein quote. And the approach from school safety, it's evolved from reactive lockdown drills to more holistic strategies that address the root causes of violence, like mental health support, social and emotional learning, create an environment where every student feels like they belong. But let's be honest, we can't slap a Band-Aid on this and expect it's going to be okay. Schools need to anticipate that future safety measures have to focus more on early intervention and prevention. That means investing in trained mental health professionals, embracing restorative justice practices over punitive measures, fostering these community partnerships that we've talked about several times today. But these community partnerships, when I say community partnerships, I'm talking community within the school. They create a web of support around every student, and the future of school safety lies in this web of support, not just metal detectors at the door. When you think about it, we have English classes to teach you how to speak and write. We have math classes to teach you how to do calculus and all these other wonderful algebraic things. Do we have classes that teach you how not to bully somebody on social media? How, as you gave the perfect example of, where just through something that seems like a fun game, we can actually learn that there's consequences to our actions. But the crazy thing to me is this. Kids walk through the door into the school, and we have certain expectations for them. Well, they'll know this, they'll know that. We expect that they're going to know how to communicate well. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But anybody who communicates well always wants to learn how to communicate even better. And the people who don't communicate well want to communicate even better. There's no loss in that type of ability to share this information with kids. It's so critical, literally to their very future as an adult.
I think the problem is way too often addressed as the mysterious outsider coming into the building. Somebody that we need to keep out. And too often it's already someone within our own walls that feels disrespected or minimized and lost. I think a lot of times there's a lot of students who walk in every day that are feeling unvalidated and lost in their life. And if that's exacerbated by the school environment, it certainly becomes a bigger issue. I think schools, as we've mentioned, schools critically evaluating themselves and finding ways to build a safe and trusting environment. You can't just put the locks on the doors and things and expect everything's going to be fine. It's powerful. And I think building both is tough, but I think finding ways to build that trust is actually the tougher of the challenge. I think putting the locks and the people, the security and all those other issues in place is the easier low-hanging fruit, but building that trust is the longer, more critical, tough look at yourself thing that is hard to do.
You know, since we're talking about best practices, I'd like to bring together two really quick analogies. One of them is an iceberg. When you picture an iceberg, about 10%. I know there's some physical science teachers that are out there going, oh, it's 9 to 13%, Carrie. I get it. We'll call it 10% to make it easy for little knuckleheads like me. About 10% of the iceberg is above the water, 90% below the water. So second analogy is what's called the 3 lives. Everybody has 3 lives: a public life, a private life, and a secret life. The public life is what's above the water. It's what everybody sees on the iceberg. It's what we post on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram and TikTok. My life is great. My kids are great. My job is great. My school is great. My teachers are great. My grades are great. Or the opposite end. 10 years ago, Fluffy went over the Rainbow Bridge. But what nobody posts in the middle is, you know, my teacher at school is driving me so crazy I feel like quitting school. Nobody posts, well, I scored today. I really irritated my wife so bad that I think she's about ready to divorce me. Nobody posts that stuff. That's because that goes against what we portray as our public persona. When you dip below the water and you go down the iceberg into the private life, that's where trust is created. That's what we need to do with people in our lives, and especially what needs to happen with students in school. If we're going to prevent school violence, we need to, as you said just a moment ago, we need to create that trust. Well, what I'm giving you is the recipe to create that trust. You have to go under the water. You have to go down the iceberg. How do you do that? Well, Carrie, that sounds great. 3 lives, iceberg, got it. How do we actually create trust? How do we go down the iceberg? How do we dip into the private life? How do we know that that's appropriate? Very simple. I'll give you 2 questions to ask. When you ask them about how things are going and they give some surface level response, like you get on a bus bench during a bus bench conversation or an elevator conversation in between floors, you simply look at them with a genuine caring look. Say, tell me more about that. Or, what was that like? 2 questions. Tell me more. What was that like? If you just use those 2 questions, you'll start to go down the iceberg. You'll start to dip into the private life. You'll start to have that student feel seen, heard. And as I said before, meeting that addiction of being understood. That's how you build trust. That's how you build community. And that is how you prevent violence.
Thanks so much to all of our panelists for today's conversation.